Hi, I'm Varun Gupta. This is Natalie Collina. We're presenting joint work with our advisor titled Repeated Contracting with Non-Myopic Agents, Policy Regret, and Limited Liability. So in this work, we're concerned with a repeated principal-agent interaction with multiple agents. So by way of introduction, we'll go through the standard single-shot contract model. So in this single-shot model, there's a principal who's deferring a task to some agent, and they're trying to get them to exert high effort on their behalf. So the agent has some actions available to them, each associated with some cost. And the action that the selected agent takes, along with this is the revealed state of nature, which the principal and agent share a prior belief over, induce some return that, with the contract, fix the payment to both the principal and the agent. So for example, if the agent takes action work and the state of nature is medium, the return is as shown. The net payoff to the principal is the return minus the contract payment, and the net payoff to the agent is the contract payment minus the action cost. Often the question of interest in this line of work is how to best design the contract or the payment rule from the principal to incentivize high effort on behalf of the agent. We're interested in a slightly different question, which is, say the principal fixes the contract beforehand over this long run interaction. How should they behave amidst competition among agents? But there are two other elements that differ in our model from what I've described so far. First is misaligned beliefs. So we complicate what I've described so far a little bit, first by assuming that maybe the principal and the agent don't share the same beliefs about the state of nature. We think this is a reasonable thing to think about, because often the motivation in settings like these are in fact that maybe the agent has more information than the principal on this chosen task. So maybe they have a more refined sense of what the state of nature might be, especially if it's very high dimensional and complicated. Second, we're interested in what happens when the principal is selecting, maybe using some algorithm amongst a set of competing agents. The agents here can be fully strategic. They're non-myopic, so they might be trying to game the system in order to get selected more often in future rounds. And the question is, what happens under settings like these? So principal selection mechanisms map transcripts of historical agent selections and historical returns to distributions over agent selections in the current round. Some examples of agent selection mechanisms might be the constant mechanism or the greedy mechanism that selects the agent with the highest average reward so far. So to recap, in this work, we're interested in a few things. We're interested in a repeated principal-agent interaction with misaligned beliefs and competing agents. So the question we were really concerned is, if the principal fixes the contract before the start of this interaction, how should they select between agents, and what behavior does certain selection mechanisms induce? The high-level answer that we give to this question is that the principal can use online learning techniques to select agents while inducing them to work only harder than they would compared to benchmark selection policies, and realize strong counterfactual regret guarantees while ensuring that the agents never need to pay the principal. So just to put this all together in one slide, our model, the principal, prior to the interaction, fixes the contract and a selection algorithm, both of which are known to the agents. The agents have differing, possibly incorrect beliefs about what the state of nature will be. And then in each round, the principal selects an agent to contract with or chooses the outside option. The selected agent takes an action. The state of nature is revealed. This determines some reward and some contract payment to the agent and some return to the principal. Here, the agents can see the revealed states of nature, the taken actions, and the returns. The principals can see only what agents they select, and they are under a bandit feedback model, so they only see what actions the agents that they choose take and what their returns are. The main behavioral assumption that we make in this work is that the agents are fully strategic and rational, and they're playing in a non-responsive equilibrium, Nash equilibrium, of the extensive form game that is induced after the principal commits to a selection algorithm and commits to a contract. So I won't go into too much detail about what a non-responsive Nash equilibrium is here. We're happy to talk offline. But the high level idea is that it's an equilibrium where the strategy profiles of the agents do not depend on the realized actions of agents. And this lets us avoid complex behaviors that might arise, like threats of collusion and things like this, if the agents are fully strategic and are optimizing over this long run sequence. And we show that such an equilibrium does exist in this game. So what this means is once the principal commits to the contract and selection algorithm, the agents who are trying to be selected, because they're only seeing any return in rounds in which they are selected, can see each other's actions and are playing in an equilibrium of this game. So our goal is to find a selection algorithm for the principal that achieves no policy regret and limited liability. We'll be a little bit more precise about what these mean later in the talk, but no policy regret essentially means that compared to some fixed agent benchmarks, the principal sees only higher return than they would under the counterfactual returns that would have arisen under this benchmark selection algorithm. So in the benchmark selection algorithm, the agent might take different actions than they would have otherwise, and we are trying to get no regret to this counterfactual set of returns. And second is limited liability, meaning that the agents never need to pay the principal throughout this interaction. Before we go into our results, some related work. Just briefly, we're happy to talk about these offline as well. One line is bandits with strategic arms. You can think of our setting as an instantiation of this. The models that are studied previously in the literature differ slightly, but they're related in motivation to our work. And second is truthfulness and repeated auctions, truthfulness and efficiency in auctions. This line of work is related in a technical sense to ours. We will use an important thing that we'll use are monotone selection mechanisms. We'll describe them a little bit more formally in a bit, but they're also used in this line of works, usually in order to incentivize truthfulness in these auctions.
Awesome. Okay, awesome. Now that Varun has done an excellent job setting up the problem, I'm going to walk us through how we get to our results. So let's talk a little bit more about what this policy regret goal is. So in some particular instantiations, say we come up with a selection algorithm and this fixed contract, this will induce some equilibria, right? Where the agents, if they don't get selected, they don't have any chance to get utility, right? So they're sort of trying to both in any given round, get a good payment that round. And they also want to, make sure that they can get picked in future rounds so they can keep getting payments. Okay, so for some particular selection algorithm, some contract, and some induced equilibria, there'll be some state of nature sequence. And altogether, this will determine the utility of the principal. Okay, so what's our benchmark? So for any benchmark algorithm that we want to compare it to, we're going to think about the policy regret here. Note that under this benchmark algorithm, we're going to keep the states of nature fixed, but the action algorithms of these agents that are playing may no longer be in equilibria because the way that we're selecting them based on their behavior now could be different, right? So under this benchmark algorithm, these agents are now going to play some new equilibria, and so it could lead to a completely different principal utility. Okay, and in particular, what are the benchmark algorithms that we want to have low policy regret to? It's the algorithms from the class of pick a particular agent every round. So you're promising beforehand, I'm just gonna pick this agent all the time, no matter what. Okay, so maybe we can think about the fact that this particular set of benchmark policies has a particularly simple equilibria amongst the agents, right? If you're one of those agents that isn't agent, in this case, agent one, you don't care what you do. You're never gonna get any utility regardless. But if you are that agent, what do you wanna do? Well, no matter what you do this round, you'll always get picked in the future, right? So you don't have to worry about that. So you just wanna maximize utility every round. So you're gonna play myopically. Okay, so our first result is that if you select agents, so you commit to selecting agents within a no external regret monotone selection algorithm that operates in the bandit setting, then you can have this no policy regret guarantee, where the policy regret is little o t if you play for 2 rounds. Okay, so why is this the case? Okay, so let's give some proof intuition. Why do we abandon feedback? Well, as Varun mentioned, this is the information setting we're in, right? So if we're selecting our actions in this case in an online learning setting. So the actions are kind of the agents that we're contracting with. And we don't get to see what an agent we didn't contract with, what reward they would have given us in any particular round. We only get to see the reward induced by the agent we contracted with. So whatever online learning algorithm we're using here, it better work in a bandit setting. Okay, yeah. Okay, cool. So what about no regret? Why is this useful? So briefly, if there are people who are not familiar, the notion of no regret is it's a property that exists in some very well-studied online learning algorithms where you can pick an action every day, and that action will then experience some particular loss, and the other actions can also experience a particular loss. You are making sure that at the end, if all of those losses stay fixed, that you're doing at least as well as if you had just picked one fixed action the whole time, the best one. Okay, so this is sort of nice and related, right? Because we are picking an action every time and experiencing some loss, right? So if it were the case that if we switch to our benchmark and the agents didn't change their behavior, we'd already have this result, right? We would be doing as well as the best fixed agent in hindsight if the agents don't change their actions. Of course, we are in a policy regret setting, so the agents are allowed to change their actions. So our concern is, okay, sure, we play with a no regret algorithm, and then in this particular setting, we're doing as well as the best fixed agent if they don't change their actions. But what if we had moved to the setting where I just picked that best agent, they would have worked even harder, right? So this is our concern. How are we going to fix this and make sure this doesn't happen? Now we're going to talk about monotone selection algorithms. This is where they come in. What is a monotone selection algorithm? It's any sort of online selection algorithm where if you have some transcript of actions selected and their induced reward, and then you have some alternate transcript, which is exactly the same, but there's some particular day when some particular action you took has a higher reward. It should be that for the future of a time, the probability that you select using your selection algorithm, the action that had that increased reward, in this case, this pi bar, that should only be higher, should be weekly higher for every single day going forward. Okay, so this is just that formula. Okay, so why do we care about this? So if we are also picking with a monotone algorithm, it means that the competitive nature of this game is only going to make the agents work harder, right? So they're thinking about both their expected payment this round. Yes. Oh, this is 5 minutes. Okay, great. Yeah, it's going to only make them work harder because it's just going to incentivize them they're not only playing high effort will make them work well, will give them high reward this round, but it'll also make them be more likely selected in the future. Okay. Okay, cool. Bandit feedback, no regret, monotone. This leads to our no policy regret result. What about limited liability? The limited liability is a thing that is often desirable in contract theory. It would be nice if when I give a contract to you, the contract never says, oh, if this thing happens, then you have to pay me money, right? It makes sense that they might not always get above zero utilities. They might have to pay some costs and it end up being too much. But, it's kind of weird if they have to pay me. And a lot of contracts that we care about and think are great, like linear contracts, aren't necessarily limited liability. So this is an issue that we often have to grapple with in contract theory. Okay, so how are we going to deal with that here? Right, so our goal is we also want a mechanism to guarantee the agent doesn't play the principal. So we're going to make a quick modification to our algorithm. We are now going to not pay the whole time. We're just going to pay at the end. So we're going to open up a tab. And then at the end, if we owe the money to the agent, we'll give it to them. If they owe us money, we're going to forget the debt. Okay, so this is limited liability as long as we haven't messed up the incentives. And I'm going to argue we haven't because we're going to use an algorithm that in aggregate after T rounds, it should be that they don't owe us money. Okay, so how do we get this? We just need to add one more trait, which is go from no external regret to no swap regret. Okay, no swap regret is like no external regret. but instead of doing as well as the best fixed action in hindsight, you do at least as well as if you got to swap all the time you played a particular action to the best action on that subsequence. Okay, why is this great here? Okay, so recall that the agent has some outside option where they get utility 0 in that round. So on the subsequent of days that I take the action of contracting with agent I do at least as well as if I taken my outside option, because this is one of my other actions, which would be 0. So the principal is getting utility at least 0 on that subsequence. But remember that it's a linear contract at this point. Actually, I might not have mentioned that. In this, we also have to assume that the fixed contract now that we're setting in the beginning is linear. Since the contract is linear, this agent has to do at least as well as 0 as well, because it's just going to be some alpha times the utility of the principal. Okay, cool. So now when you have bandit feedback plus no swap regret plus a linear contract, you now get limited liability. And so now we can say, okay, if we want both, we can just sort of combine these things. Boom, bandit feedback plus no swap regret plus monotone plus linear contract gives us these two things. And this, the property, an algorithm with these particular properties actually is also something, a contribution of our work. There was, to our knowledge, no such algorithm that existed. A key thing that we utilize in our work is some of the results from some very new no swap regret algorithms, which there's 2 papers here who both come up with a very similar no swap regret algorithm, which is kind of fundamentally different from some of the previous ones like Blum-Monsor. So in particular, Blum-Monsor and all previously known no swap regret algorithms were actually not monotone, which is, I don't know, maybe some of you, depending on how you thought about these, might think that's surprising or maybe not. But there's this fixed point computation going on that you can show, that we show, you know, there actually is we don't have the monotonicity property. But the no swap regret algorithms presented in these newer papers are monotone. And so we were able to use that and then do a monotonicity preserving reduction to the bandit feedback setting for those algorithms. In order to get the algorithm that we need for this result. So you need such an algorithm is enough, and also we show such an algorithm exists, and it's efficient. Okay, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.